Hey everyone, in today's video, I'll be showing you how to integrate Tortoise ORM into a FastAPI app. So the reason why you want to use Tortoise over something like SQL Alchemy is because Tortoise natively supports Async IO, which goes well with the async functionality in FastAPI. So I'm going to use the API that I created a couple videos ago, which actually has no async functionality at the moment. As you can see, all of the functions in here are synchronous, but I'll convert them to async as necessary, and I'll show you how to integrate Tortoise in here. So in the video that I did before, I'm just using an in-memory database, whereas with Tortoise, I'll use a real database, which is SQLite. So let's go ahead and get started with this. What I'll do is I'll stop the server it's running. And if you're not familiar with this API, you haven't watched the other video, basically what it does is it allows you to add cities to a database with a given time zone. And then when you return the cities from the database, it will return both the list of cities that you have along with the current time for the time zones of the cities in the database. So I'll be extending that and removing the in-memory database and using an actual database. So the first thing I need to do is I need to install Tortoise ORM. So to do that, you just use pip install Tortoise ORM. And there should be a dash between the Tortoise and the ORM, and it will install that. And then also, if you're using a different database from me, so I'll be using SQLite, you need to have the Async IO version of the driver for that database. So if you look here, you see AIO SQLite. So that's just an asynchronous version of the SQLite module that comes with Python. So that installs by default. But if you're using something like Postgres or MySQL, then you have to install the versions for those directly. And they're pretty easy to do once you look them up. If you look in the Tortoise documentation, you'll see them there. They're usually like AO or AIO Postgres or something like that, but you can look them up in the documentation. So now that I have this, what I want to do is I want to create a model to represent the city that I have in the database, right? So what I'll do is I'll create a class here. And by the way, Tortoise ORM models are very similar to Django models. So they work in a very similar way. They're not exactly the same, obviously. But if you're familiar with how models in Django work, then Tortoise ORM should be pretty easy to learn for the basic stuff, right? So what I want to do is I want to create a city class, right? So I have this model down here that is also city. I'll rename that in a moment. But this, I'll call it city. And I need to inherit something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import something called model from tortoise.models. So I'll go here and I'll say from tortoise.models, import model. And this will allow me to create a model for the city. So if you watched last time, you know that I'm going to have a name and a time zone in the model. And you can clearly see that in the Pydantic model that I have here. And to create these, you need to have fields from Tortoise. So I'll say from Tortoise import fields. And then for name, it's going to be fields.charField. And I can say how many characters it will have, let's say up to 50. And I can also say each name in the database will be unique. And for time zone, it's also going to be a char field, and I'll just say 50 characters. And in addition to those, I need an ID. So I'll create that. So fields.int field, and this is going to be the primary key of the table that gets generated from this model. So I just put pk equals true, right? So those are the things that I need. And here I can use a Pydantic model directly, but I don't necessarily need to because Tortoise comes with some helpers to create Pydantic models from the database model. So I'll use that. So what I'll do is I'll comment out this one and I'll remove it when it gets time to where I'm changing the model so this doesn't clutter things up. But to do this, I first need to import the helper. So I can say from tortoise .contrib .pydantic, and I want to import Pydantic model creator. So the name should be pretty obvious. It's going to create a Pydantic model. And the way it does that is it's going to use the database model to create this for me. So I can say city, let's say city Pydantic. This is going to be equal to that Pydantic model creator. And then I need to pass in the model, so city. Can give it a name. I'll call this city as well. And that should be it, right? So I have that. And there's one more thing that I need. So this is a bit clumsy, but you'll see how it helps in a moment. So I'm going to call this city in Pydantic. So this model is only going to be used for incoming data, right? So I'll say a Pydantic model creator, city. I'll name this one city in. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to exclude the read-only field. So an example of a read-only field in this case is ID, and there's going to be another read-only field that I'll show you later in the video. But for now, I want to exclude all the read-only fields in my model. So exclude read-only, and that's true. So with this model, it's going to display all my fields, but for this model, it's only going to handle the ones that aren't read-only. And in this case, it's only name and time zone that aren't read-only. And the reason why I want to do this is because when I create a model, I won't be creating an ID, and I won't be creating this other attribute that I'm going to have in the future. The user only specifies the name and the time zone. So that's why I need two models to handle this. So now I have that done. We know that the name and the time zone are there, so I'll just get rid of this. And now what I want to do is I want to connect my city model to FastAPI's app, right? So to do that, here I'm going to import from tortoise.contrib.fastapi, import something called register tortoise. And this is easy to use. I can just call this function down at the bottom of the file. So register tortoise, and it's going to take in a few things. So the first is the app object. So I have the app object here, and I'm just passing it. Then I need a URL for the database. So in my case, I'll be using SQLite. So it's going to be SQLite and 2 slashes, and then the name of the database. So I'll just call it db.sqlite3. Next, I want to say modules. So the modules means where my models are. So models, and I need to give a list of where all my models are in terms of Python modules. So in this case, they're only in my main.py file. So I'm just typing main here. And then I can put generate schema to true. So generate schema will create the database initially and create the table in the database. This only needs to be true for the first time it runs, but you can just leave it as true because it won't overwrite your models every time you run. So you can just leave that there. And then if you want, you can add exception handlers. So add exception handlers equals true. But in this video, I won't go over the exception stuff. I'm just going to follow the good case. So now that I have that here, I should be able to create the database by simply starting the app if I don't have any errors. And let's see. So I have an error on line. If I can find it. Let's see. Now it doesn't give me the exact location, but it tells me invalid arguments for response field. Hint, check that class main city is a valid Pydantic field type. Oh, okay. So the reason why this is happening is because I still have the city as the input for this one here. So I'm going to modify this momentarily, but for now I'll comment it out so it doesn't give me that error. So let's try that again. And a register tortoise got an unexpected keyword argument, generate schema. And I think this is plural, so that should be generate schemas. And then I'll start it. And then if you look over here, you see it created a SQLite 3 database. And the reason why these other two files exist is because of the way that it's going to write data to the database. Because when you're using async writes, you don't want to block any other reads or writes that are happening at the same time elsewhere because so many can happen at the same time. So that's just one way that SQLite handles it, right? So if I just stop the app and open up the SQLite database and type schema, we see that I have my city table here with ID, name, and time zone. Okay, so now that I have the city table created in my database and I have my model set up, what I want to do is I want to allow the user to add data into the database. And as you can imagine, when you're using something like this, it becomes even easier because you don't have to convert things directly, although in my case, really, it can't get that much simpler than this one line, but we'll see how it changes. So the first thing I need to do is I need to convert this to an async function because I'll be using an awaitable inside, and I'm going to await any time I access the database. So anytime you perform a query or anytime you save something, you need to await it because that's the whole point of using an async ORM. So instead of just db append city.dictionary, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a city object. So I can type city.create, right? and I still get the city data, and I can convert that to JSON. And I just need to pass these as keyword arguments. So I'm just using 2 stars. So city.json. And one thing that you might need to do, in my case, I don't exactly need to do, but if you use exclude unset, what this will do is it will set the values that the user didn't pass in to null. So if you have some fields that are nullable in your database, then if the user passes in nothing for those fields, then they just end up as null. Because if you don't have that exclude unset, then it's going to error out because it's missing some of the fields. So I have that, and this isn't awaitable, so I have to await it, right? And in addition to this, I can return the city object once the database creation has finished. So city object equals await city.create, and that's going to give me the city object that I can do something with. And what I want to do with it is I just want to return it. So here, what I was doing is I was just returning the last part of the in-memory database. So I'll remove that, and what I'll do is I will await. So this is going to be a query. I'm going to query the city table, and this should be actually the city pydantic. So this is the city pydantic model. So I'm going to be creating a city pydantic model. And where is the city pydantic model going to come from? I'm going to take the city object that I have, and I'm just going to use that and create a pydantic object from it. So from Tortoise ORM. So this method gets added for you automatically when you create from the pydantic model creator. So from Tortoise ORM, and then you pass in city object, and then that's it. So let's go ahead and try this, see if it works. And we see invalid arguments for response field, and that is because I am using the wrong model here. So this is trying to use a city object as the object. I need to change that from the last version. So let's try that again. And it works this time. So let's go over to Swagger, and let's refresh the page and go to post create a city. So we still see name and time zone, and I'll hit try it out. And for the city name, we'll say Las Vegas. And for the time zone, we'll say Americas slash, or I think America slash Los _ Angeles. I'll hit execute, and we get an internal server error. So did I make a mistake somewhere? Yes. So I'm trying to create a dictionary here, not JSON. So let's just restart the server, and then we'll go ahead and try to create that again. So I'll just execute this again. And now I get a 200 response. So I get ID 1. So that ID 1 comes from the database. I have the city and I have the time zone, right? So if I add another city like New York City, and then the time zone should be America, New York, execute, we see ID 2, New York City, and then America, New York. So let's take a look at the database. So we'll open up the database and we'll select star from city, and we see the 2 cities have been saved in the database successfully, right? So now that we have this, let's work on our get route. So here, what we're doing is we're creating an empty list because we want to append to this list. We're going to loop over all the databases in the in-memory database, which I don't have anymore, so I need to change this. And then I'm performing a request to this API and getting the current time, using the time zone, and then appending all that and returning it. So that is not the best way to do that now that I have Tortoise ORM and I have a model working. So what I want to do is I want to add this current time as a field to my model, but it's going to be a read-only field. It's going to be a computed field. So we can add that here. So I'll say current time. So you just name it whatever you want this to be. And then this will return a string. And what I want to do is I want to request the current time from that API. So here, this part's going to be exactly the same. And then I just want to return that current time, right? And now that I have that, I need to add the pydantic meta class inside. So I know that this field that I just added is computed. So you just type computed and you add a tuple, and you can say current time. And then when you create the pydantic model, it will know that current time is a read-only field. So it gets excluded in this one, but included in this particular model, right? So now this will run every time I need the current time, regardless of how many cities I'm looking at. So let's remove all of this because I won't need it anymore. And now all I have to do is just have a query. So I can actually just put this on one line. So because it's a query, I have to await it. And then I can say city, and this is going to be city pydantic. So I want to create a city pydantic model. And I'll say from query set, right? And then I can just query city.all. So this is going to query city.all. It's going to get all the results, and then it's going to create a list of pydantic objects from that and then return them. And then FastAPI is going to convert them to JSON for you. So now if I start up the server and we see trying to use await outside of a await or an async function. So I just need to add async here. And now if I run this and go back to Swagger, I can get the cities, try it out, execute. We get an error. So let's see. City is not defined. And let's see. I think I just used the wrong GET request. Or did I? So we're looking at this one. We're getting all the cities. And it's just saying that city is not defined on line 21. Oh, okay. So here, I'm trying to use the city object or the city dictionary that I have. But since I'm inside of the model, I just use self.timezone. And then that should allow it to work. So we'll execute it again. And now we see the results. So I have Las Vegas, I have New York City, and I can see the time. So it is 7:47 in Las Vegas, and it is 10:47 in New York City. So it's calculating a current time for me correctly. So now what I can do is I can convert this get city one for an individual city in the same way that I converted this one. So first, I'll convert this to an async function. And of course, I won't need to do any of this stuff anymore because I don't have the in-memory database. I don't have to return a JSON or a dictionary directly. What I can do is I can return the pydantic model. And what I can do is I can say city pydantic, right? And then from query set single. So instead of giving me a list, it's just going to give me a single thing. And then I can query the table. So city.get ID equals that city ID that's being passed in. And then because this is a query, it is an awaitable, so I have to await it. And then we can get individual cities. So now if I go back to Swagger, hopefully this works the first time, I can go up to, let's see, where is it? Here we go. So this get one city, try it out. So let's get city number 1. I get Las Vegas, I get the current time. City 2, I get New York City, and I also get the time in New York City at the moment, right? So I have get cities, get city, and create city all converted. So now I just need to work on delete. So delete is pretty simple. So I'll convert this to async. And then here I want to simply query the table. So city, and I think I need a filter on this, so it can give me a different object. So city filter, and then ID equals city ID, and then dot delete, right? I don't really care what it returns. I just want to delete it. This is another type of query, so I have to await it, and then I can return nothing at the end. So now that should be everything converted. So if I go over here and I go to delete, and I want to delete New York City, I'll try it out. I'll put ID number 2, execute it, I get a code 200 with nothing returned because that's exactly what I want. Now, if I go over to the list of all cities, I'll execute this. I'll get a list, and I only have Las Vegas inside of that list. So now I've converted everything over to Tortoise ORM, and we see I had to convert everything to async because they all use await in some way, because all the queries in Tortoise will be awaitables. And as you can see, it's less code now that I move the request for the current time up into the model itself. So let's just remove this, and that's it. So if you have any questions about what I've done in this video, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll include the link to the code in the description below if you want to take a look at it. And if you want to modify it, you can go ahead and do that. So if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time.